Are tariffs the new inflation? Here's a simpler way to ask it. If you add a toll booth to every port and border, does the final price on the shelf go up? And how fast does that pain spread? We've been here before. In 1930, the United States passed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, hiking duties on thousands of imports. The goal was protection. The result was retaliation, higher prices on everyday goods, and a world economy that got smaller when it most needed to breathe. Today, with tariff headlines back in the news, on steel, chips, EVs, solar panels, and entire supply chains, the rhyme is getting louder. So let's trace the mechanics, separate myth from memory, and ask what history suggests about the bill that always arrives when you tax trade. Start with the basic plumbing. A tariff is a tax on imports. It's paid at the border by the importer, not the foreign exporter, and then it ripples. If you're the importer, you face a choice. Eat the cost in your margin, push it to your customer, or split the difference. If your competitors pay the same tariff and your product isn't easily replaceable, you push. If you're in a knife fight market with thin margins, you eat a chunk now and edge prices up later. Either way, the tax doesn't vanish. It migrates into sticker prices, smaller package sizes, service fees, or fewer discounts. That's why economists call tariffs a hidden tax on consumers. It's not itemized on your receipt, but it shows up in the total. Smoot-Hawley is the cautionary tale because of the timing and the chain reaction. Passed in June 1930, it raised already high duties across more than 20,000 goods. Countries retaliated. World trade shrank. Were tariffs the sole cause of the Great Depression? No. Credit contractions, bank failures, deflation, policy errors, those were core drivers. But tariffs poured sand into the gears just when finance, farming, and factories needed speed. For farmers already hit by collapsing commodity prices, losing export markets was brutal. For manufacturers, higher costs for imported inputs met weaker demand abroad for their finished goods. The lesson: in downturns, a tariff isn't just a wall, it's a multiplier of the wrong kind. Now bring it forward. Today's tariff talk lives in a different world. Globalized supply chains, just-in-time logistics, and manufacturing spread across borders. When you tax a finished good now, you often tax a chain of components that crossed oceans several times. A 10% tariff on the end product might feel like a 10% surcharge on the whole thing, but firms reroute. They friendshore, nearshore, swap parts, redesign bills of materials, and build parallel lines to qualify for exemptions. That engineering is expensive and slow. During the transition, costs go up even if the final tariff line doesn't look huge. Translation: you can get price pressure even before the tariff fully bites, simply because companies are paying to move the maze. So does that automatically mean inflation spikes? Not always. Two forces collide: demand and pass-through. If overall demand is cooling and retailers are fighting for share, they'll absorb more to avoid losing customers. If demand is hot, or the product is a must-have with few substitutes, pass-through is higher and faster. In practice, tariffs inflate goods more than services, and within goods, they hit tradable categories with complicated supply chains: appliances, electronics, autos, solar gear, batteries, construction inputs. You might not see tariff in the CPI table, but you'll feel it when the "why is this $200 more than last year?" conversation happens at checkout. History also teaches that tariffs don't stay put. Smoot-Hawley triggered tit for tat. Our era triggers something subtler: friction. Export licenses here, national security reviews there, quotas, local content rules, procurement preferences. Each one is a micro-tariff, a time tax. Friction raises carrying costs: more inventory, longer lead times, higher working capital, pricier insurance. Those costs surface as inflation's cousin: stickier prices that won't fall back even when headline inflation cools. You hear people say, inflation is down, but everything still feels expensive. That's friction talking. Who pays? In 1930, farmers and exporters were hammered first. Consumers followed. Today, small businesses importing parts are the first to feel the invoice, especially if banks tighten trade credit. Then come households in two ways. One, directly through prices. Two, indirectly through wages and jobs if firms delay hiring, cut hours, or postpone investment while they rebuild supply lines. The effect is regressive. Lower-income households spend a bigger share on goods, clothes, appliances, household items, where tariffs bite hardest. The bill lands where flexibility is smallest. But there are winners. Tariffs can protect domestic producers long enough to scale. A steel mill gets orders it would have lost. A battery plant locks in customers. A solar manufacturer finally competes on price. If that breathing room births a competitive industry, the country can gain resilience, less exposure to foreign shocks, more jobs in strategic sectors. The hazard is that the protection becomes a comfortable chair. Without pressure to get efficient, prices stay high and the tariff morphs from bridge to crutch. Britain saw versions of this in the interwar period. The US saw it repeatedly in protected niches where quality improved slowly and costs stayed sticky. So how do you tell whether a tariff cycle is becoming the new inflation versus a temporary nudge? Watch 3 signals. First, import prices versus retail prices. If import prices rise and retail follows with a lag, pass-through is working and households pay. If retail doesn't budge while margins compress, firms are eating it temporarily. Expect later price creep or cost cutting. Second, retaliation or redirection. If partners retaliate or impose their own frictions, expect broader price pressure and weaker exports. If trade quietly reroutes through tariff-friendly hubs, you may get a one-off adjustment, then stabilization. Third, capacity response. If domestic capacity in the protected sector actually expands, plants built, productivity up, some of the early price pressure can fade as supply grows. If capacity stagnates, the tariff becomes a perpetual surcharge. Let's return to Smoot-Hawley for nuance. The easy moral is tariffs bad. The real lesson is about context and timing. In a fragile credit environment, taxes on trade compound stress. In a healthy expansion with targeted, time-limited protection tied to capacity building, you can buy breathing room. If policy is disciplined and sunsets are real, the past warns against using tariffs as a substitute for strategy. They are tools, not plans. Now tie that to today's price pain. You feel it because the economy has layered shocks, a pandemic that rewired supply, a rate shock that raised financing costs, and a geopolitical cycle adding friction to trade. Tariffs, even modest ones, ride on top of those layers. A 5 to 10% border tax doesn't sound catastrophic until it stacks on shipping that's more expensive, inventory that sits longer, and capital that costs more. The total shows up as that stubborn number you see on the sticker and the quiet squeeze in your budget. What about the argument that tariffs can be disinflationary by crushing demand? It's possible. If tariffs slow growth enough, the overall economy softens and headline inflation falls. But that's not victory. It's a trade-off. You would be lowering inflation by reducing activity while leaving relative prices higher for the protected goods. In other words, fewer purchases at higher unit costs. For households, that feels like worse for more. So where does this leave a consumer, an investor, or a policymaker who doesn't want 1930s echo, but sees the strategic case for some guardrails? A few grounded takeaways. If you're a consumer, price shop aggressively in tariff-hit categories and watch for model year transitions. That's often when retailers eat margin to clear inventory. If you run a small business, audit your bills of materials for tariff exposure and negotiate longer-term contracts before new rounds kick in. Redesign where a single imported part sets the price of the whole. If you're a policymaker, pair any tariff with a clear, credible runway for domestic capacity, permitting, training, and capital, and a sunset clause that requires renewal against measurable productivity gains. Protection without performance targets is how temporary taxes become permanent prices. Are tariffs the new inflation? They can be the new floor under prices, especially for goods, if they stack onto a world of friction and stay longer than the strategy they were meant to serve. Smoot-Hawley reminds us that when trust in trade breaks, costs rise and retaliation shrinks opportunity. Our moment is different in technology and scale, but similar in one human habit. We reach for simple tools when problems are complex. The bill comes due in the checkout aisle. History's verdict isn't that nations must trade without guardrails. It's that guardrails should be narrow, timed, and tied to building something real, so the bridge leads somewhere better. If you tax the road forever, the town at the end gets poorer even if the toll booth gets rich. And when you feel that price pain today, remember, a tariff doesn't just charge a foreign factory, it quietly taxes tomorrow's choices at home.